Welcome to the Transform Your Relationship podcast, where we'll go beyond the typical relationship advice. I'm your host, Manisha Terry, somatic healing practitioner and mentor. Each week, I'll share personal insights, client success stories, and how my holistic trauma-informed approach can help you transform your relationship from the inside out. You'll learn ways to recognize and prioritize your needs, get to the root of what's upsetting you, and courageously ask for what you want so you can confidently co-create the relationship you desire. You'll also hear from guest experts who will be invited to share their unique approaches to transformation, and at the end of each episode, you'll receive one tangible practice you can implement right away to transform your relationship. Let's dive in. Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of the Transform Your Relationship podcast. I'm your host, Manisha Terry. I want to welcome all of you who are regular listeners, as well as those of you who are new to me today. Welcome, welcome. It is mid-August. The day this is being released is also the new moon in Leo. If you've hung around me for a little bit, you know that I'm very much into astrology, not necessarily to shape our world, but to really give us context into what it might be happening in our lives and how we are not just walking around alone without any kind of guidance, that we are definitely connected to much more than we can see. So for me, that looks like tapping into astrology, tapping into what my natal chart has told me about myself, a little bit of a blueprint, as well as tuning into the transits in the sky to help me make sense of what's going on in my life. And while this is not the topic of today's podcast, and maybe I'll do one in the future about how I use astrology personally and how I've used it with my clients, today we're going to be talking more about the nitty-gritty of relationships, which, you know, I also love to talk about and is one of the main things I support my clients with as well. Today, we're going to be diving into why it might be hard for you to ask for what you need in your relationship. This is, as all my topics are, I think anyway, pretty nuanced. There is no one size fits all here, and there are no rules or formulas in terms of asking for what you need, deciding what you need, communicating what you need. This is so dependent, I feel, on the dynamic that you have with the other person that you're in relationship with. But I do find that there are some things or ways that we can think about this that can really help us, be the kind of person that does stand up for themselves and know themselves and ask for what they need in a way that also honors the other human in the relationship who also has needs and probably also wants to be really helpful and meet your needs, but really in a way that honors each of you and the relationship as a whole. I think sometimes where this can get sticky is when we don't actually know what we need, and this is probably more common than one would think. I mean, sometimes you think about, well, are my needs being met? But we don't necessarily ask, well, what are my needs actually? And have I communicated them? And what does that look like? And all of these ands. For some folks, you might not know what you need because you've never really asked yourself. And so one of the first things that you can start to do is really consider what's important for you to have in a relationship in terms of maybe time spent together or attention or communication or certain boundaries or a certain level of responsiveness or consistency. These are all things that when people are not on the same page can become really sticky in the relationship because maybe one person has a natural expectation for something, but the other person has no idea what the expectation is. And this is where a lot of conflict can potentially arise. The other part about not really knowing what you need, and then of course, if you don't know, you can't communicate it, is that you might not be aware. And so then we end up having a lot of needs that maybe are being driven by our subconscious or unconscious. Like, yes, there are these expectations sometimes, and expectations can sometimes be very conscious. But a lot of times where I see difficulty in communication and in relationships are really when our subconscious needs and needs that we don't even realize are driving the show are really the things driving the show. Like, for example, there might be a need for a certain level of attention or a certain level of responsiveness, and the other person may not know that, and the person expecting, immediate response to a text, for example, may not even realize why they need that, but because they've had some earlier experiences in life, or maybe there hasn't been a lot of consistency or responsiveness, they're kind of looking for that to be solved through their relationship. Like, okay, if this person in front of me is now very consistent and responsive and makes me feel loved and validated, then it really fulfills this need that perhaps was not met when I was a younger child or a younger person. And I always like to say that I'm not, we're not blaming anybody here. We're not like going back to your childhood and looking at the circumstances and kind of identifying, oh, this person or my caregiver or my parent like didn't do the right thing. We can hold that maybe we've all had experiences early on that were not ideal, and some of them certainly traumatic, and you can definitely work with those and have your feelings and process that. But in the context of this conversation, because we're in a podcast, I cannot see you. I don't know what your personal circumstances. We're just going to kind of think about from the perspective of, okay, this might have happened to me as a child, or I might have had this experience when I was younger where some of my needs weren't met. And now, as a result of that, currently in my adult life, I'm realizing that a lot of these are the drivers in my adult relationships, and some of them really serve me, and some of them maybe not so much because they're creating like either unrealistic demands on somebody else, or you might be overcompensating and really trying to meet other people's needs in a way that they're not even asking you to. And so that can look like overgiving or over tending to somebody when they haven't really asked for it, or maybe they don't even want it. So we're going to talk about both sides of this coin in this conversation. And if something I've already said has struck you, I would be always curious to hear from you, because again, this is a very nuanced conversation. I can only go so deep into things because again, I cannot see you and we're not having a two-way conversation. That I just want to share some of my thoughts and ideas and experiences, as well as share from the perspective of what I have seen working over the years with clients, in hopes that it will give you some insights. So in addition to not necessarily knowing what you need or what your needs are, some of the other things that I've seen stop us or make us hesitate in asking for something, or some of our needs to be met in a relationship, whether it's a partnership or a different relationship, a friend relationship or a family relationship, is that you don't want to be seen as too much, right? There's this conversation out in the world right now of, are we too much? Are we playing it small? Are we not doing enough? Are we not speaking up for ourselves? And so I think that definitely plays into it. You might be second guessing yourself. You might be overthinking. You might be worried, like, am I being too demanding? Is this person going to think I am over the top or selfish or need too much? Or am I quote unquote needy? I did an episode kind of early on about the word needy and sort of the context around that as an earlier episode. I'll link that in the show notes as well. But this is something that really does come up for a lot of people, whether they're conscious of it or not. They might not necessarily think to themselves like, am I being too needy, or am I being too much, or is this person gonna, leave me or abandon me? But a lot of times, in terms of our own, like what we call core wounding or core issues, for a lot of us, being rejected or abandoned is a really legitimate one, in the sense that we all need a sense of belonging and people in our lives to survive. So if we are doing something that might jeopardize a relationship, and we might lose that relationship, or that relationship might be negatively impacted in some way, then there can be a real core issue or core wound that comes up for us around this feeling of rejection or this feeling of abandonment. And for that reason, we will end up not asking for what we want or not asking for what we need, even if we do know it. So I referenced earlier, like maybe you don't even know what you need. And that's one thing that you can start to figure out. But two, sometimes you do know what you need, but you're afraid to ask for it because there are some underlying fears there that you may or may not have identified that are impacting your ability to do that. And some of those things, again, may be conscious, they might not be conscious if you really sat with it and you did some journaling or writing around it. Or in my work, we use a somatic approach to really drop into our body's experiences and sensations, and old memories might come up. It might lead you to an incident or experience that you had where you really did get in trouble for speaking up for or for asking for what you needed. Maybe you had a parent or a caregiver who couldn't give you what you needed. So you always felt like too much. Your needs always felt like they were over the top. Maybe you were even put down or shamed for asking for things. And so all of these things can really shape how we behave as adults. And even if you don't have an early experience or a memory or some origin story around why this might be difficult for you, we live in a society where there are just lots of cultural expectations and societal expectations that tend to keep us small because we might be shamed or someone might make a comment. And especially when you're young, if you've had this experience, whether it's in your household or maybe out in the world, we really tend to internalize them. And I often speak to a crowd who has a level of sensitivity. You might identify as highly sensitive, or you just might be emotionally sensitive. A lot of times we will internalize those messages and like keep them really, really close. And like that will shape our identity. It will shape how we move through the world. And I think that's just important to recognize, because if we don't even realize that an interaction, 15, 20, 30, even 40 years ago is impacting the way that we are interacting now, that's just really something to be mindful of and make a note of and notice, like, is this impacting the way that I live my life currently? And is there some work around that I can do to release myself from this expectation that doesn't even make sense for me anymore? Now I'm going to go to the other side of this conversation, whereas on one side, we might not know what we need. We might be hesitant to ask for it because of some of these experiences. There might be cultural or societal ways that we keep ourselves small. And on the flip side, right, we might really be comfortable asking for what we need, or we might really be comfortable expecting that the people in our life, maybe the ones that are close to us, support us and are there for us for everything, that we can go to them at any time and talk to them and that they be available for us. And sometimes we even associate meaning with whether they're available or not. What I mean by this is, whether it's conscious or not, sometimes if someone is available for you, you might make that mean, well, they really love me and they care about me. And if they're not available for you for whatever reason, you might make that mean the opposite, right? That they don't love you as much as you need, or there might be some other story that you're telling yourself about their availability for you or how they feel about you. And I'm going to invite you to just pause for a moment and reflect, have I ever been this person in a relationship? Because I can tell you that I'm pretty certain everyone has, or at least most, the majority of people have, right? I think it's impossible to be in relationship for however many years and not have had those experiences where maybe we might be putting a little bit too much on somebody else. And this can happen when we're stressed, when we're feeling emotionally overwhelmed, we're going through something in that moment and we're looking to others to support us. This can also happen when maybe we don't have real tools or practices to find a sense of grounding within ourselves. It just might not be something that you've had a lot of experience with. So we don't necessarily want to make this a thing where, oh my goodness, what have I done? But it's really just a question to ask yourself, like, what are the things, like, what are my go-to things? Like when I'm feeling super emotionally scattered or overwhelmed or chaotic, yes, of course, it's 100% okay to want to communicate with people and get their support. But are there ways that I can help, like, soothe myself in some way? And these are the things that we can start to explore and implement so that we're finding our own ground while at the same time, reaching out and connecting for support. I also want to caution you, if you are typically a person who thinks about everybody and is overgiving and you're the first person in line to support others, please don't make this now suddenly mean, oh my gosh, maybe I'm the person who's over asking for something or just really chaotic or constantly asking for help. So let's just temper it, because I know sometimes our brains can, when we hear something, our brains can start to think, oh my God, do I do that? And so really, as best as you can, just trying to see this through a nuanced lens, a relatively balanced lens. Like we've probably all been on either side of this scenario. So yeah, just to caution you, especially my overthinkers out there, please don't start to spin out and wonder if now you are, quote unquote, bothering somebody or upsetting them or taking up too much space. If you are feeling that way, or if you're wondering if in a particular relationship that is happening, I would invite you to just take some time, pause, maybe take a walk or write about it a little bit, and then really have an open and honest conversation with whoever is popping into your mind around this. You can ask them like, hey, how's this been for you? I noticed XYZ, or I noticed that I've been going through a lot and this is what's going on in my life. Like, how are you experiencing this? Is it okay for me to bring this to you? Should I bring a little bit less of this to you? Might even say, yeah, I know that you care about me and want the best for me, but I also know that this is overwhelming and I don't want to overwhelm you because I really value our relationship. So there are ways to have these conversations to kind of check yourself, and kind of going back to the very beginning of what I was saying, like there's no right way to do this. There's no formula. It's really so much about the dynamic between the two people and being able to communicate in these ways and check in with yourself around your needs, the other person's needs, like how they're feeling. Are they feeling balanced? I would also say that if you're going to open up this conversation, just be prepared to hear what the other person has to say. Everybody's going through different things. They might say, yep, it's no problem. You're welcome to share. They might say something like, yeah, it's been a lot, but I'm here for you, but maybe we can also help you get some other supports. And they might even say, you know what, this has actually been a bit too much. And I love you and care for you, but I just can't be your listening ear to this degree anymore. So just reflecting on, okay, all of the possible ranges of responses. And are you in a place where you can receive that and then do something about it? It's really about kind of preparing ourselves, because again, everybody is going through different things. And even if on the outside they seem perfectly fine, sometimes they're also limited in their own capacity. And we don't always know that from the outside, especially if we're going through something personally. This is something that I've had to think about this past year, is I came across a couple of situations and they overlapped where I was being asked for my time and attention. And I just felt like there were some expectations being put on me by some people that it kind of didn't make sense for these expectations to be put on me. So as someone who tends to lean on like the overgiving side, I, dove right in. I wanted to be helpful. I wanted to be there when the person needed it. But over a bit of time, I was starting to feel resentful. I noticed that I was feeling a bit shut down and feeling overwhelmed myself. And I really needed to pause. And I talked to some other people about, gosh, this is feeling really overwhelming. Like, I don't really know what to do here. I want to be helpful, but I'm kind of wondering if this is the right way to be helpful. I don't know if I'm enabling these people. And so I had to pull back and evaluate whether it was healthy for me to even be so available, why I was leaning in that direction, and really even like what need it was fulfilling in me, because we don't do things unless it's also fulfilling our needs. So this is definitely not a conversation to say, oh, this other person was doing this thing that was wrong. It was more like, what was the dynamic between us that allowed for me to be overgiving and for this person to also be in a position where they were asking or expecting a lot from me. And when I could step back and ask myself those questions, I realized that there was a need for me to feel like I was being helpful, like I was doing something good. And this was combined with somebody else's needs that they had in that moment. And that is what transpired or kind of got entangled together to create this stressful situation. And so I had to consciously decide to pull back and really check in with what was okay for me and what I needed. And that's not always easy, especially for somebody who does want to be helpful. But I really also want to caution all of you that are out there that want to be helpful. Sometimes we tend to want to be helpful because it allows us to feel good and we feel needed. And there's something about being helpful that really is soothing for us. I know that that is for me. I'm highlighting this for you specifically because I have a feeling that most of you guys who listen fall into that category. But I also want you to think about, what is the thing that I'm gaining here? And so that may or may not be like the healthiest way to go about that. And maybe part of your job is also learning how to put that into check and just be able to also receive and give in more balanced ways. I think that we can all be on varying parts of the spectrum here in terms of asking for what we need, or why we might have trouble with it, when we might not have any idea. For some of us, maybe we have an idea, but we're hesitating and not asking for it. Maybe there's some second guessing going on. Maybe there's just this feeling of being too much or being a burden or possibly being rejected or someone getting mad at us or feeling disappointed. For some of us, we just have to learn better communication skills. And better communication doesn't necessarily only mean having the right words to use, but it's this ability to be able to feel through our feelings and be with the discomfort and get to this place where we feel clear about what we want and how we feel and what we're thinking, and then be able to say that. Because if we just looked at communication in terms of speaking, sometimes our words are things that we end up regretting and that we want to take back. So before being able to say the thing, we really want to be able to feel the feelings and sit with the discomfort and get to a place where we can get to be a little bit more neutral. Or if you're talking in sort of stress physiology language, like we want that part of our brain that goes into fight, flight, or reactivity to calm down so that our frontal cortex, the clear thinking part of our brain, can actually be the part of our brain that is communicating. I also think that it's important to recognize that we're going to have different dynamics with different people. So just because you might be showing up one way with somebody, like you're more of an overgiver in one relationship, in another relationship, you might be the one that is receiving a lot, right? And so we might end up balancing ourselves out in different relationships. And I would say that, is there a way to bring each relationship a little bit more into balance? And I've said this before on different occasions, but balance doesn't always mean equal. Like it doesn't mean an equal amount of giving and receiving, but it's really what feels good to the two people involved in that relationship. If this is resonating for you and you are either in a place where you're wondering, what is it do I need? Or I do know what I need, or I think I know what I need, but I'm second guessing, or I don't exactly know how to ask for it. I really think one of the first and best exercises to do is to really brain dump all of the things that you feel you need in a relationship. And it could be across the board. We talked about in the beginning, it could be like time or responsiveness or consistency or the way you communicate or different kinds of boundaries or, really tangible things that people need from each other in relationships too. Like I would really encourage you to brain dump all of that so you can get all of it out, and then you'll have something to work with. And simply because you have, a list of 20 or 30 things on the list, that doesn't necessarily mean that those are all your needs. You then want to be able to sit with some of those things, notice how you feel, what's coming up, and what actually feels important to communicate. That is an exercise that you can start on your own. And if you would like more support around this identification of your needs is actually one of the first exercises that I share in my course, Boundaries for a Better Relationship. And then we move into a somatic practice where you can really get clear on some overwhelming emotions, and then move to a third section where you can hopefully better communicate what you need. So if this is something that you would like a little extra support around beyond what I've shared today, then the link to that course is in the show notes. And I would encourage you to purchase it and go through the exercises. There are exercises in there that you can do definitely more than once because our needs are ever changing. And there is a meditation in there that really you can use anytime you're feeling overwhelmed or you're lacking clarity or you just have a ton going on and you would like some grounding to actually figure out how you feel instead of just feeling a swirl of emotions around you, so that you can take action in a way that feels really grounded and clear in your relationships. I hope that this has given you some things to think about and gets you a little bit closer to identifying and communicating your needs. I would love to know if you had any insights. You can always DM me on Instagram or send me an email, and I look forward to being with you the next time. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode of the Transform Your Relationship podcast. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to help more people find us so they can transform their relationships too. As a thank you, every month, we'll pick one winner to receive a free 45-minute one-on-one somatic coaching session with me to explore and gain clarity around a relationship challenge. And if you know somebody who could benefit from listening to the show, then please do share and help me reach more highly sensitive women who want to experience richer, more connected relationships.